This is the France 24 debate. We're asking if it's a tipping point for Syria, the massacre that took place over the weekend in Hula, 108 killed, more than a third of them children. The tipping point is the words used by the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, the mediator in this crisis. With us to talk about it is Vincent Floriani of the French Foreign Affairs Ministry, Monzer Mahous of the opposition's Syrian National Council. He's based here in Paris. From Brussels, Mariette Schaake. She is the Dutch member of the European Parliament who's been following this very carefully. And also with us, Anton Kozlov of the American Graduate School. Welcome back to all of you. Before the break, we were discussing the issue of weapons on one side or the other. And again, the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan is in Damascus right now. The UN peacekeeping chief, Hervé Ladsou, saying that the blame probably falls for the massacre that took place there in Hula, probably falls with militias who killed most of those people with small arms and knives. Monzer Mahous, let me ask you the timing of this massacre. Why did it happen at this particular moment?
I suggest that the Syrian regime feels that he is quite in the corner today, because no people now believe all his theses about the violences. I would like to ask how we could explain why these terrorist groups, which are claimed by the Syrian regime, are not firing on the demonstration organized by the Syrian regime. Why this terrorist group never shot on the people who were making the election. There was election all over the Syria, the first time for approving the constitution, the new constitution. No one fire was taking place. Recently, there was the election of the parliament in Syria. There was even one shot in Syria. How could we explain why this is a good occasion for this terrorist group to shot on the Syrian regime? They are friends of the Syrian regime. They are against the regime. Why they are shooting the peaceful people and not the Syrian regime? Nobody could explain it.
Mariette Schaake, how do you explain that this massacre took place at this particular moment in time?
Well, I think it's important that this gets investigated and that the impunity ends. I mean, when I hear a word like the tipping point, as though this massacre was the tipping point, I think that that's very difficult to say after so many people have already been killed and have seen violence of the very worst kind. So I think we've long seen the tipping point pass, and I hope that this will be the final one. Let me just say that. In terms of, the gentleman who made the statements about two parties being responsible or various parties being responsible, it is clear to the international community that this is a very asymmetrical fight and that the government has a huge responsibility and that the impunity on that side absolutely has to end. Added to that, we've now seen that the Iranians have admitted that they are involved in Syria, and this should concern all of us to a great extent. There were long rumors about this, but it's now been admitted, and I think the international community should very much look at the regional impact, including the ties between Assad and Ahmadinejad, of course. And now on top of that, we see heightening tensions in Lebanon. So besides the focus on ending the violence against citizens, we should be very much concerned about the potential outfall or fallout in the region, the role that Iran plays and the impact that it has in Lebanon. And so it's all the more reason to make sure that this is the final tipping point and that we really will not see any more killings from the regime against innocent citizens. Let there be no confusion about it. This is a very asymmetrical situation, and people may be forced to self-defend, but what would we do in the same situation? I think it is clear to the international community who's responsible here.
I'll quote you here, Anton Kozlov, what the chief of UN peacekeeping, Hervé Ladsou, said just a few hours ago. Part of the victims killed by artillery shells. Only the government has heavy weapons, has tanks, has howitzers.
Well, from what I understand, first of all, from what I read regarding this report, 20 people were killed by artillery shells. The rest were killed by small firearms and knives. I would like to respond to this to the person that spoke before me regarding the asymmetrical situation. Now we are having guerrilla warfare in Syria, and anybody knows that any form of guerrilla warfare is an asymmetrical warfare. So I don't think there is anything to use this, any reason to use this concept of asymmetry in warfare and irregular warfare to squarely blame only the Syrian regime. I think we have to be aware that there is a war and there are many different parties involved. So I think this is very important to keep in mind. Now, second of all, regarding the UN report, I'm not saying that the Syrian government has no responsibility whatsoever. This is not the point. What I'm saying is that all parties involved in the situation of a civil war are to blame for this kind of events.
Vincent Floriani, your reaction?
Well, I mean, you don't have two parties there. You have a regime with its army, its security forces, its secret services, and you have peaceful demonstrators. There are some people who are violent, but they are protecting themselves. So you don't have two parties on equal footing.
So why did the Hula massacre take place, in your view?
Well, it's difficult to say. I think I would agree with the other gentleman who said that the regime is cornered and they are trying to kill people from time to time, maybe as revenge against something that happened somewhere. I don't know that. It has. I mean, there have been many massacres. It's one too much now, and I hope it's the last one.
To Marietta Shaka's point, that this week, the Iranian regime saying that openly that it has special forces indeed inside of Syria. Was that a surprise to you that they openly are saying it?
Well, we know that the regime in Tehran has links with the regime in Damascus. This is clear, and they are explaining how in Iran they repressed the people after the 2009 election. Because there was also a huge repression in Iran after the election. So I think they are trying to share how to repress people. I'm sure they're doing that.
At this moment, also in the center of it all, Kofi Annan, of course, he met this Tuesday with the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad. Annan, the former UN Secretary General, the mediator in this case. A seminal moment for Annan, who was UN Secretary General when there was the Rwandan genocide, the massacre in Bosnia. Let's listen to what he had to say coming out of that meeting with the Syrian president.
We are at a tipping point. The Syrian people do not want their future to be one of bloodshed and division. Yet the killings continue and the abuses are still with us today.
Marietta Shaka, there it is again, that word you don't like, tipping point.
Well, if it's the final tipping point, I think we've at least finally come to a point where people say enough is enough. When I hear people talking about, all sides are guilty, can somebody please explain what's the guilt of these children who are innocently murdered? I think there's no possible justification for it, not at all. And it has to end. And doing nothing is really not an option. It's not a solution. We see the situation getting worse and worse, and it simply has to end.
So what would you like Kofi Annan to have said coming out of that meeting with Bashar al-Assad?
I think the condemnation of violence could have been much more strong. I think proposals, but I haven't heard his entire statement. I think we were just listening to a clip. But I think there should be an increase, for example, in the monitors at least, because what are you going to do with a couple of hundred people in such a large country? There have to be concerted efforts to really make the killing stop and to also start thinking about the phase after the Assad regime. We have to consider the risk of sectarian violence going on, and we have to start investing in this transition process. And the opposition is an important player here, so I would also urge on anyone who can play a role there to be united and to start thinking about a joint future for all Syrians after Assad. And I think Annan could have safely said that the impunity of this horrific violence against unarmed citizens must stop and will stop, and that the UN will take a responsible leadership role here. And I've not seen enough of that, and I think that the Syrian citizens that are innocent and that are being killed are paying the price, and it's unacceptable. So at least within the EU, I will try my very best to make sure that we take a leadership role, that we take our responsibility, and that we increase the pressure and work with Turkey, with the Arab League, within the UN, and also start a new dialogue with Russia to really try to push them to change their stance and to come to the right side of history.
Anton Kosov?
Well, I think this use of children and trying to say that there's only one party guilty, I think it's nothing but demagoguery, you know, because I think we are in a situation when we do have armed groups, we do have weapons coming from abroad, from Russia to the Syrian government, and also from various Gulf states to the Syrian opposition, different groups of Syrian opposition. Moreover, we do not have any firm evidence that the massacre, or at least the entire massacre in Hula, was perpetrated by the Syrian army or by the Shibai militia. So I would like to say that first we need to establish all the facts and then proceed with condemnations. Most importantly, I think if Assad is guilty of all those crimes assigned to him, perhaps the International Court of Justice should issue a warrant. It's been going for 14 months now. So far, there was no move.
All right, on the France 24 Debate Facebook page, we asked if the Hula massacre will be a turning point akin to the shelling of the Sarajevo market, which prompted the international community to intervene in Bosnia's civil war. Here's what Zelko from Zagreb said. No, the circumstances are different. The market massacre was at the time when the international community decided to stop the war in Bosnia. They're still, unfortunately, waiting for another one in Srebrenica. At this moment, nobody is prepared to take a similar step in Syria. Do you agree with that, Vincent Florani?
We'll see. I mean, we need the Security Council to act, definitely. The Security Council is in full support of Kofi Annan and his plan, but this is not enough. We might need coercive measures to impose corridors, for example, to access the population. And that only the Security Council can do that under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. This is the kind of discussion we'll have with our Russian partner on 1st of June when President Putin meets with President Hollande. I think they will discuss how to progress in the political transition in Syria and stopping the bloodshed. Now,
it's interesting that you mentioned that June 1st meeting with Vladimir Putin, because there's going to be President Obama during the month of June who will also be meeting one-on-one with Putin. The New York Times reporting that ahead of the Hula massacre, Russians and Americans at Camp David broached the subject of a Yemen solution for Syria. This was on the sidelines of the G8 summit. Otherwise put, same regime but a change of leadership, with an anonymous U.S. diplomat telling the Times that Prime Minister Medvedev told Obama, yes, this was something we could talk about. The paper says the option has even become known by its Russian term, the Yemensky variant. What do you think of the Yemensky variant? Will that take off?
Well, as you told, there's conversations, there's some discussion about this issue. If it could guarantee the departure of the Syrian regime, not only the president, all the regime, okay.
But that's not what they're talking about.
Yes, and the other thing is nobody
that's not what happened in Yemen, obviously.
Yes.
It was President Saleh went, but the regime is still there.
But in Syria, it should not be possible at all, because nobody will accept it. The second thing is nobody will give the Syrian regime a guarantee that he will not be taken to have the responsibility. In Yemen, there is not too much people killed. In Syria, we know there's more than 15,000 people killed. There are around 60,000 people missing. They are killed. And there are around 80,000 people in prisons. And 1 million people displaced inside the country, about 50,000 people in the neighboring countries. Nobody could accept that there should not be the responsibility to be taken by Bashar Assad and his regime. It should not. We accept only that he leaves the power, but not anything more.
Vincent Florani, what are your thoughts on a Yemen variant and a Yemen-type solution?
Well, the situation is very different from Yemen to Syria. Basically, Hanan's plan is it's also about a political transition. There are 6 points, but one of the points is the political transition. So there have been talks about one of the key members of the government becoming a transition head of state. But to prepare a transition, not to remain heads of state, so to prepare an agreement with the opposition and having the democratic demand of the Syrian population being answered.
Marietta Shaka, your thoughts? Could this be a solution?
Well, it's clear, first of all, from the persistence and the courage of the Syrian people who continue to engage in largely peaceful demonstrations, that they have lost any faith and do not consider this a legitimate regime. The same goes for nearly everyone in the international community. It's not just al-Assad, even though he bears the ultimate responsibility and should be held accountable for what has happened, simply because he's the head of the state. But I think more needs to happen, and there's going to be a very difficult transition process after Assad leaves. I wish he would come to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, as was suggested by one of the other speakers. However, Syria hasn't ratified the Rome Statute, which would allow such scrutiny and justice being served. So that also tells you something about the willingness to be held accountable for deeds such as the ones we're sadly continuing to witness. And it would be great if he could be held accountable in international court.
In an international court. Anton Kozlov, final word, because we're out of time. Do you think there is daylight for Russia and the West to come to an agreement on what to do about Syria?
I think they certainly can come to an agreement. I do not think it's going to be the Libyan scenario, because Russia will never accept that, because clearly they don't want to see that again. And Putin is the one who was very much against that. It was signed by Medvedev. So now Putin being the president, we will not see the...
Are we closer to a solution?
I don't think so. I don't think so, unless the Yemensky variant will work.
All right, and we'll have to see how it plays out. I want to thank you very much, Anton Kozlov, Vincent Floriani, Monzer Mahous, and Marietta Shaka for joining us from Brussels. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for business right here on France 24.
Tomorrow on France 24, an exclusive interview with Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Questions range from Iran's controversial nuclear program to Kofi Annan's plan for Syria and government domestic policies. Don't miss this exceptional interview live from Tehran tomorrow from 6 p.m. Paris time on France 24.